thank all of you for this beautiful evening. Let me especially appreciate the Oxford Union President, Noah Lack, my distinguished students and faculty members that are here for this brief ceremony. Whenever I have the opportunity to discuss with very young people like this, I always like to be brief. I prefer listening to them and addressing the issues they will raise, because they have very young, inquisitive minds. And in most cases, I don't always want to bore them by going into lengthy discussion. But today is quite unique. It is my real pleasure and a great honor to be here in these hallowed chambers of the Oxford University, one of the world's most prestigious institutions, not just to speak, but to exchange ideas and answer questions from you, some of the world's best brains at this level. It is instructive to note that since 1823, the Oxford Union has consistently presented this platform for scholarly and social congregation of the students' population, the interchange of ideas, propagation of views, the enhancement of knowledge, and for the overall good of mankind. This is highly commendable, and I sincerely appreciate that you have given the opportunity to also come here and follow your unique tradition. This discussion is topical for our global shares for development and security, especially in Africa. The issue of youth entrepreneurship in Africa is very critical, as Africa is the only continent for now that we're expecting a population boom. Studies revealed the symbiotic relationship between youth unemployment and youth restiveness. Accordingly, most violent crises in Africa have been traced to either lack of education or inadequate education or lack of empowerment of our young population. Joining search for development and sustainable peace must therefore begin with how do you educate and how do you empower your young people, because they are the cannon foders used for crisis. When I was the governor of my state, because I started my political journey as a deputy governor, then governor of the state, later moved to be the vice president and later the president of the country. But when I was the governor of my state, and later when I had the opportunity to become the president of Nigeria, I first asked myself certain basic questions. Why are some nations rich and some poor? I believe most of you have read so much literature about that, the wealth of nations. And you ask yourself, why are some nations rich? Why are some nations still poor? Even at the individual level, why do individuals that sometimes grow up in similar circumstances, some of them end up to be failures, some success stories, when they grow up in the same similar circumstances? I always ask, is the wealth of nations a result of geography? Is it the weather? Is it the culture of the people? Or are there certain things that enable some nations to be richer than others? Then the main question I used to ask myself as a leader then was that, what could a leader do to effectively lift a people out of the depth of poverty and enable them to achieve prosperity? Because that's all about leadership. How do you create wealth for your people? After much soul searching, my conviction in this regard is that the issue of the wealth is a creation of the human mind, properly prepared by education. It's the mind that creates wealth, and that mind must be prepared by some form of education. Could be formal, could be informal, depending on the level. It is my firm belief that any nation that does not spend its wealth and resources to developing the capacity of its youth will eventually be forced to devote its resources to fight insecurity among these very youths. As a leader, you now take that decision. Do I help my youth to develop, or I abandon them and face the consequences of the insecurity and spend money to manage crisis. To me, there are two key areas we must invest our resources if we are to convert this perceived time bomb, because in Africa, we feel that the population of the youth is a ticking time bomb. But is it really that it's a time bomb, or it's really an opportunity? I feel it is opportunity. But then you must do something for you to convert that perceived time bomb to opportunity. And this is the issue of enabling or growing entrepreneurship among the youth. You must educate them, and you must give them the opportunity to develop their own businesses. Let me use my experience, because even when we are waiting, some of the students are asking me very piercing questions. And that is good, because I'm not just speaking as a teacher. I'm speaking from the background of a political leader. Within that, I spent 1 year, 5 months as the governor of my state of Bayelsa in Nigeria. Immediately I became the governor, the first thing I did was to give emphasis in education. It was my major priority. Because of this, my belief that wealth is a creation of the mind, and the people must be properly developed. I invested in the infrastructural development at all levels of education, the primary level, the secondary level, and the tertiary level. But there's one unique thing I decided to do, because I came from a rural part of Nigeria. In Nigeria, you have big areas, Lagos, Abuja, Kano, Kaduna, and so on. Then I came from a very rural part of the country. In fact, my state was created a few years back, 96. That was the last set of states that were created in Nigeria, about 6 states. Bayelsa is one of them. It was carved out from a state called River State, the rural part of that. So the people were poor. The education is quite low. So I said, under this circumstance, what do I have to do? I must emphasize more on education. I started building 2 specialized post-primary schools, one for gifted children, people with brains like you here. Then, of course, also one for talented, because there are some people who have natural skills. They may not be too brainy in terms of passing exams, but may be good in sports, they may be good in arts, they may be good in drama, and so on. So we said, let us also build a school for this category of people, so that in addition to the academic work they are doing, we will develop their natural potential. So at time of graduation, if they choose, even if they read medicine or read law, read engineering, but they choose to play soccer and earn money, or any others, or act film or sing and make money, they can do that. So that you now give them reasonable opportunities. So I started constructing those special schools. But while that construction work was going on, I said, look, this is a rural area. We have parents that can't even afford secondary education for their children, but they have very brainy children that drop out at the primary school level. But as a government, we must encourage our best brains. So I set up a program to go to all our primary schools, because as at that time, at least more than 90% of our children go through the primary school. Then some don't proceed to secondary school. Some from the secondary school, maybe less than 50% proceed to tertiary schools. So I said, if you want to get the best brains, you have to go to the primary school where almost, at least over 90% attend. Then we get the best from among them. And we said that every year, while we are waiting for the gifted children's school and the talented children's school that will take more people, so that every year we must get a minimum of 100 people at that level, send them to the best secondary schools in the country. The idea is for them, the idea is for government to take care of their education through the best secondary schools and send them to the best universities in the world. That was my target. But somehow I didn't stay too long. After 1 year, 5 months, I had to go and contest election to be the vice president of the country. And somehow that program didn't go the way I expected. Even the people we sent to the secondary schools, they didn't attend the kind of universities I had in mind that they were to attend. But when I assumed office as the president of Nigeria, I launched a similar program, what I call Presidential Special Scholarship Scheme for Innovation and Development. And I said that Nigeria, as a major African country, if we must follow the rest of the world technologically, you have to develop your best brains. You must give them the opportunity. So what I did was to ask the Ministry of Education and the National University Commission to take from among the Nigerian graduates who made first class in these STEM areas, and from there select a minimum of 120 a year and send them to the best universities in the world. And of course, Oxford University is one of these universities that most of our students were interested. We did that because of my belief that we must create people, intellectuals, and people with cranial capacity that can move the country forward. In fact, when I launched that program, I said, look, we are trying to get a crop of young people that can launch Nigeria to the moon. But we didn't stop at that level because those are very few people. We are selecting about 120. What of the rest? Nigeria is a country getting close to 200 million people. So we also expand the university admission. We built 12 new universities to give opportunity to Nigerian students. Then we also established a maritime university to emphasize on maritime technology. We send young people to different countries, within the country and different countries, for various technical training, because you must build capacity for young people to be able to move forward. And of course, the foundation of my administration, we termed it the transformation agenda. And it was conceived to engage the latent potential in the entire nation and to stimulate and enable higher productivity. And this was also the foundation of our youth development drive. We did a lot about youth development. The transformation agenda sought to address the problems of youth job creation, with emphasis not just in getting our young citizens employed, but in assisting them in acquiring the right skills and providing the requisite support. This was to enable them set up and run their own businesses, thereby becoming employers of labor themselves. Because we want young people to set up their own businesses and employ other young people. In Nigeria and most African countries, there are well-educated young people. The problem is how to create opportunities for them. My administration then came up with various programs to encourage young entrepreneurs. The most popular one is what we call Youth Enterprise with Innovation in Nigeria, with the acronym YOWIN. And the concept of the YOWIN is that we launched it in 2012. We get some youth that have unique business proposals for startups or expanding existing small businesses they are running. The YOWIN is structured as a competitive cyclic initiative, because we do it every cycle, which invites and reviews business plans submitted by young people. Young people who wanted to be entrepreneurs were asked to submit their business proposals, and these are assessed based on relevance, profitability, either there is demand for whatever you want to produce, and how practicable for that your business to survive. And the winners were trained and given grants by the government, something akin to venture capital. And we also had some of our successful businessmen as mentors to these young people. The YOWIN was a multi-sectoral, cutting across light manufacturing, food processing, and also the service sector. While we're on the YOWIN, we also believe that one area that we must go in is agriculture. And of course, you know that most of the African states, including Nigeria, the food we eat is produced by rural farmers using subsistence level of farming. And we see that the world has moved away from that. We have more people produce food. We need fewer people to produce food for the rest of the community, and that you must have to do commercial farming. So we have a broad-based agricultural agenda, what we call the Agricultural Transformation Agenda, ATA. Under that agenda, we now carved one, we talk about YEAP, Youth Employment in Agriculture, as a subsector of that transformation agenda in agriculture. And here we encourage young university graduates, not necessarily those who read agriculture. Some of them read engineering. There were a few medical doctors that were even involved, some lawyers and others, who are interested in commercial agriculture. Then they were trained, they were properly mentored, and they were given grants. And we encourage them to take the whole value chain from farming to processing and marketing. The idea is to make them independent people, to begin to create wealth from agriculture. We gave them the pet name, Nangropreneurs. We also assisted young people who graduated from tertiary institutions by sending them to corporations. Because some of the corporations, because of liquidity problems, they need workers, but they don't have the money to pay for so many. So we send some young people to work with them, and we pay their salaries. Not actually the salary they're supposed to earn, but something that can make them work there and also acquire some experience. And that also makes them more marketable in the employment market. We call that the graduate internship scheme. Of course, in Nigeria, we have this program called the National Youth Service Corps Program, where people who finish from tertiary institutions serve the country for 1 year. As at that time, 2012, we increased the minimum wage of the country to about 18,000 naira. And then the youth corps were earning about 9,000. And I felt that a graduate, even though it's a voluntary service working for government, it's a compulsory service working for government, there's no way a graduate to earn lower than the minimum wage of the country. It does not make sense. So we have to double the allowances we pay to the youth corps. And one key area we did is that I told my vice president that, look, after the 2010 election, because I came in 2010 to be the president to complete the tenure of the late president. Then I contested 2010. So we started our real government in May 2010. And I called the vice president and said, look, the whole world is using ICT to create jobs for very young people. So we must create a special ministry to handle ICT. Before the ICT was under the Ministry of Information, we call it the Ministry of Information and Communication. And the main duty of the ministers was how to protect government, how to talk, how to paint beautiful colors about what government is doing. And I said, look, we must get our ICT out of any form of propaganda and use it as a way of creating jobs for young people. And we picked one lady engineer, a very serious-minded person. And I told her, look, you were to be the pioneer minister for this new ministry. Your duty is to sleep over, think as you wake up till you sleep, you have to say, how do we use ICT to create jobs for Nigerian young people? That is your job, not politics. And it was a success story. We improved on the broadband penetration in the country. And we set up ICT incubation centers, what we call the co-creation hubs, one in Lagos and one in Calabar. It will interest you that the one in Lagos, the success story was so much that when the founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who had just visited Africa, that is his first visit to Africa, the first place he visited was the Lagos hub because of what the young software engineers were doing. It attracted him. Of course, then I've left government, and I was surprised when I got that information, and I was quite pleased that our dreams are making global impact. One area I remember while in the holding room, one of the students even asked me, was about the entertainment industry in Nigeria. what we popularly call the Nollywood, is really popular among the blacks in the Caribbean and in Africa. And some young people started doing this great work, and they never had a good encouragement. As someone who took over, I felt that, look, this is an area that can create a lot of job opportunities for young people. And government cannot just keep away from it in a country like ours. We must encourage them. The first thing we did was for me to approve $200 million as a soft loan for them, those who are to produce films. And Nollywood started contributing significantly to the GDP. In fact, in 2014, Nollywood contributed 1.4% to our GDP. And more young people were involved. We also did well in the sporting industry. Nigeria is fairly big, like you know, and there are quite a number of talented young men and women. And we did our best to encourage them. But one thing I had in mind, and I remember during the campaigns leading to the 2015 elections, I promised the sportsmen and women that immediately I win the elections, I'm going to set up a special fund for sports. And that fund will be used to develop infrastructure for all kind of games and sporting activities, will be used to fund young people for their training programs within the country and outside the country, will use for the welfare of athletes, because people who are participating must have some security. And of course, we will also go into light manufacturing on some of these equipment and things we use in the sporting, so that as a nation, we can properly key into the global sports industry. Well, unfortunately, I bowed out at the 29th of May, so we couldn't lose the funds. But I believe it is a good idea, and probably one day somebody will take it up. So my students and faculty members, if you listen to me, you will really see that there is so much emphasis on education from when I was a governor of my state to when I was the president of the country. And I do that because of my primary belief that education is the key. If you must get minds that can create wealth for populations. Because I know I've been interacting with youths, African youths, Nigerian youths. And despite the incredible challenges we have, Nigerian youths are achieving great things and placing Nigeria positively in the world map today. And of course, it applies to quite a number of African countries. We have challenges of infrastructure, power, road, transportation. But even with these challenges, they are doing their best. And all what they need is encouragement. And I also believe that getting a job, government employing you or a corporation employing you alone, cannot give you that financial freedom that you need. You may not drive the kind of car you want to drive. You may not own the kind of house you want to own because your salary must be limited. The only thing that can make a young person financially independent is when you have your own business. And of course, those who make big money these days are those who develop ideas and market the ideas. And of course, money follows ideas. And that is why there is so much emphasis in education. And my flagship programs I have mentioned in my presentation, the Talented Children's School and the Gifted Children's School that was to set up in the state of Bayelsa. Of course, the special presidential special scholarship program, what we call the PRESID, at the national level, the ICT incubation centers, the UWIN and the Negropreneurs, including the Nollywood. All this was ideas that government, my team, set up to make sure that we create a group of young people that will be financially independent, not a group of young people that will continue to depend on and government employment. Definitely not everybody will run an enterprise. There must be people that will work in these enterprises. But the more enterprises we have in the country, the better. The more job opportunities. So people who pass through the tertiary schools can have where to work. So if you look at the activities we've done as the president of the country, I always say that, look, we may not have been very perfect people, because it's difficult to have perfect people on earth. But we did our best, and our best yielded an era of unprecedented economic growth for Nigeria. A growth that proved the truism that a nation's wealth is not underneath the ground, but between the ears. The wealth of nations are in the head, not mineral in the soil. Under my watch, Nigeria was projected by CNN Money to be the third fastest growing economy in the world for the year 2015. That was the projection by CNN Money. And rated as the largest economy in Africa and the 23rd in the world by the World Bank and the IMF, with a GDP of above $500 billion. These, in a nutshell, are some of the ways myself and my team try to propel our country, because we believe that the only way we can create wealth is to empower the young people, giving them the relevant education, giving them the relevant skill, and in addition, those who have the capacity to set up their own businesses, encouraging them to set up their own businesses. So that if, for example, government is able to support, say, 3,000 youths to set up their own businesses, we expect that they will start as small and medium-scale enterprises, SMEs. And probably even at the starting point, they may employ 3 or 5 others. That will be maybe 5 times 3,000 or so. And we expect that in about 10 to 15 years, some of them may grow up to medium-level enterprises. And from because after launching the program in 2012, 2013, 2014, we did some exhibition. And from the accounts given by these very young people themselves, some of them were very, very hopeful. And some of them were doing very well. And I believe that it's a program that will endure. I'm quite pleased that while we were in the holding room, one of you here said that he was doing a special study on the UWIN in Nigeria. So I said that, well, whenever he's in the country, let me know. Because I believe that this kind of studies by an academic environment here, they will add a lot. As at the time we conceptualized that program, we were in a hurry to put the program forward. When people take it as a case study, they will be able to suggest some modifications. So either my country or some other countries that will do a similar thing will now have a good template that I believe at the end of the day will be able to create jobs for our teeming young population. I'm convinced that, yes, the youth population in Africa is growing. We have the highest percentage of the youth population. But the whole continent of Africa is just about 1 billion people. So the percentage of youth is high. But I don't see it as a time bomb. I see it as an opportunity. Only if we, the leaders, can encourage them and use their potential, their energies, their brains to create wealth for Africa. I thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for such an insightful talk. And from the youth of today to your own youth, I wanted to ask you if you agree with the statement that your political rise was the most meteoric in the whole of Nigeria's history. Is that a true statement?
Well, to some extent, yes, because I'm somehow unique in terms of my service to the nation. I joined politics in 1999 as a deputy governor of a rural state. Then somehow certain things happened, and I took over as the governor of the state before we concluded our first 8 years. So I served as the governor of the state for 1 year, 5 months. I was preparing to formally contest as the governor of the state in my own right. Then my political party, then the ruling party, now dragged me to the center to contest as a vice president of the country. Of course, we won the election. 3 years into their first tenure, we lost the president. And by the Nigerian constitution, the vice president automatically takes over as the substantive president. So I completed the remaining 1 year. Then 2011, I formally contested as the president. Of course, I won that election. I served for 4 years. Then I was to go in for my second tenure, which we contested last year. Of course, I lost the election, and we're moving ahead. So within that space of 16 years, for you to serve as the deputy governor of your state, the governor of your state, the vice president, and the president is something quite unique.
Yep. And is there a next chapter in the political story of Dr. Jonathan?
It's just to be having a conversation with young people like this.
We're happy to read that chapter. We'll move away briefly from business, but we'll come back to it. You mentioned that Nigeria needs to follow the rest of the world technologically. I'm wondering if you think the same is true socially, for example, by legalizing gay marriage, for instance. Is that something
Yes,
that...
of course, you cannot separate economic development, technological development from social interactions. Yeah. So, the issue of same-sex marriage issue normally comes up from time to time. I know why you're asking the question. Some of the young people here probably they may not know, because when I was in office, the parliament passed a bill criminalizing same-sex marriage. And people ask me that, okay, if your parliament passed a bill criminalizing same-sex marriage, why do you have to endorse? Now, I used to tell them that my not endorsing the bill would have been a wasteful enterprise. Because the Nigerian laws, when the parliament passes a law, and the president, normally, president has to endorse it to become an act of parliament and become a law. But in a case where the president disagrees with the parliament will go and vote. And if 2/3 of the parliament, of course, democracy is all about majority interest. It may not. If the 2/3 of the parliament votes, then the president's signature is no longer relevant. So whether you sign it or not, it becomes a law. And that is one law that for one reason or the other, 100% of the parliament, both the Christians and the Muslims, passed. So even if I did not sign it as at that time, it's a question of 30 days, and it would have become a law. But I felt that it was an opportunity for me as a leader to use that one to control the population. Because before that law was passed, in Nigeria, we'd never had a national law, a federal law, that controlled marriages. Marriages were controlled by customary laws. In the southern part, were controlled by Sharia laws in the Muslim areas. And maybe in the Christian areas, they were controlled by the English common law. And these are limited to the states. And the federal government has no control, because except you have a law that governs and controls marriages nationally, these powers were within the states. And as at that time, this issue of same-sex marriage was becoming a major security problem, because there were some states that people wanted to lynch people that were suspected to be involved in either lesbians or gay, and people want to lynch them. And the federal government had no law to regulate that, apart from, say, if you kill, of course, a murder is murder. But harassing people, there was no clear law. But when we set up that law, I say it was an opportunity. We now have a national law, and I can control. And I used to ask people, yes, we signed that bill into law. How many people have gone to jail? It gives the federal government the opportunity to manage a very delicate situation. And I used to say that, look, the issue of same-sex marriage is evolving. Even most of these countries, it's just evolving. And maybe the next few years, the story may be quite different. But as at that time, I think the parliament probably felt that we needed something to give the federal government the bite, the strength to control a very delicate issue that we had as a nation. And I used to tell people, because immediately I signed that bill into law, I remember even at the UN, the Secretary General spent up more than 1 hour with me discussing it. And I said, just go and sleep. Nigerians will not be discriminated against because of your sexual orientation. And I can assure you that no Nigerian is being discriminated against because of the sexual orientation.
Okay. So do you think there needs to be some kind of constitutional reform to take power away from the states and centralize it with the federal government?
Well, I am no longer in office, so there are certain suggestions that I don't want to come up with. I don't want to push the sitting government, because any statement made by a former president becomes weighty, and it becomes an issue for people to discuss. But just like as I mentioned to you, that law was passed by the parliament. There's no provision in the constitution, but the constitution is the grand law. And you don't really know any constitutional amendment. The parliament, at the appropriate time, will review the law and take the rightful decision based on the exposure, the experiences of people, and so on. And when people are well educated and people will no longer discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation, the parliament will do what is right for the people. You don't really need constitutional amendment. It's just an ordinary law.
So there were many, many, many successes during your tenure, but there were also some quite tragic events, particularly in the north with Islamic extremism. Do you think the West have a role to play in thwarting these insurgencies, or do you think it's best sorted out by local government?
No. Definitely the West has a role to play, because I remember when the issue of Boko Haram terrorists, when some young people start imitating what is happening, especially in the Asian countries, and they call themselves that they are ISIS, West and Central Africa, and they started linking up with some of this global terrorist group. I had problems on my hand. And terrorism is something we all know globally. It's a major problem. Even countries as powerful as America, they still have challenges of terrorists. I personally wrote a letter to President Obama. I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the President of France, and some other countries, not to talk about my neighboring countries, that look, we must all come to assist us to nip this at the bud stage. We don't have the technology to manufacture sophisticated weapons, so we rely on the West for this. And if you must confront terrorists, you need superior technology, because these are people who are ready to die. They are suicide bombers. So you are dealing with people who want to die, but you wouldn't want your soldiers to die. And the only way you can be superior to them is to have superior technology, which we don't have. And we can only get that from the West. So the West have a major role to assist countries in Africa that are under this terror. Okay. Whether it is Nigeria, whether it's Niger, whether it's Mali, the West has a role to play.
Since we're talking about the West and we're indulging ourselves, I was wondering, what, if any, impact does Brexit have on Nigeria? Brexit. I think that answers the question.
Oh, okay, no, yeah. Well, Nigeria is the colonial territory of the United Kingdom, the Great Britain. So any major thing that happened here affects Nigeria in one way or the other, definitely. The issue of Brexit is mainly economic issue. And if the pound, for example, drops in value, automatically affects the Naira in one way or the other. And we have a lot of trade links. So anything, major thing like Brexit that happened here, definitely has an impact in our economy in one way or the other.
Now, you mentioned Nigeria being a British colony, and I want to read you a quotation. I want to ask you what your thoughts are. It's a quotation from a former local government chairman, whose name I don't have, and it says...
What is his name?
I don't have his name. I can try and find it for you after, but the quotation is, the Nigerian system was designed by colonialists to extract as much as possible and to transfer it. That group changes. First it was colonial masters, then the military, then a select group of citizens. So from that point of view, the government is functioning as it should be. Do you think the Nigerian government copy a colonial model of exploitation?
No, I don't think it's exactly correct. Yes, the feeling is that In the early days, of course, we know that if you read history of nations, it's not just about Nigeria or even the African countries. We called America the New World. America, British people moved into America. Of course, America was to be conquered, but they resisted it. So in the early days, 16, 15, 14, up to 18th century, there was expansionist tendencies. Empires were expanding. Countries were going to look for raw materials in other places. So yes, so the colonial period, that time, looked at more like what raw materials are we going to get from Africa. So the interest was more in terms of getting raw materials from Africa. Though in some of the African countries, the approach was slightly different. Of course, that's why we had this apartheid problem in South Africa. The whites wanted to settle and live there, and they settled and they become indigenous population. And that is why South Africa is the most developed country of Africa south of the Sahara. Because the whites that moved to South Africa took South Africa as their own country and they wanted to live there. But in most other countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and others, the idea was you go there, look at the trading relationship, look at what you can get out of it to develop the industry. Because the industries, of course, that was during the Industrial Revolution. The industries were in Europe. So you need the raw materials to bring to these industries. When we gained independence in 1960, just like maybe the local government chairman was saying, when we gain independence, we have the first set of leaders. If you take the Nigerian example, we have the first parliamentary system. And that government did not last for a very long time. And it was overthrown by the military. The military took over, then there is another military coup and another counter coup and another counter coup. Because that is why the man is saying that probably, why do you have multiple coups? Is it that the governments who have been taken over from the colonial masters are behaving like the colonial masters in terms of exploiting the people? But it's really neither here nor there. But the key thing is that as you progress as a nation, be it Nigeria or any other African country, you started, a nation is like a human being. At independence, even if you talk about educated Nigerians, there were very few. Very few people were exposed, and that cut across the whole of African countries. We never had the kind of people that will really handle some key sectors of the economy. Maybe some areas they may not do too well, but if you look at it, people tried. I am not one person. It's not because I had the opportunity to be a president of Nigeria for 5 years. No. But I'm one person that believes that as individuals grow, so nations grow. I'm not a student of history, but I read a little bit about history. And you know that most developed countries also had this history of gradual growth before they get to where they have reached. But sometimes when people are looking at government, they will want a toddler to play, to be in on the soccer field playing a World Cup. Somebody must pass through some stages of development, and you cannot beat that. You cannot abridge it so much. So there may be failures, there may be successes, but all what we are looking at is, are we progressing? And I believe we're moving.
Okay, talking of progression and going back to your talk, it is said that you prepared for the next generation as opposed to your next election.
Yes.
When you were in office. Do you have any regrets about that?
No, I have no regrets about that. Because if you listen to me, both the speech I presented today and my interactions with Nigerians, I always say that, look, there's a common statement I used to make that I say I was not elected the president of Nigeria to spread poverty. I was elected the president of Nigeria to create wealth and spread that wealth. A leader, you must think about the future of your people. We are here in the UK, developed society. Maybe in the 11th century, this place was not as developed as it is. People pay the price. Some even die in the process of moving these nations. And I always talk to Nigerians, especially when I meet them outside the country, that look, when you go out and you see these beautiful things, people work for it. None of this came by just divine providence like manners from heaven. People walked. So we will all walk. If it will cost my life, to me, it's okay. So you must prepare for the next generation of Nigerians. I lived in a setting that I wouldn't want my children to live in the same environment. I passed through difficulties even for me to go through school. I wouldn't want my children to pass through the same curve. So my children, my grandchildren should even be more privileged. So you must think about the next generation. Otherwise, your people will continue to be slaves in terms of the global power play. So you must prepare for your grandchildren. You may not live to see them, but you wouldn't want them to continue to live the kind of life you live. So have no regrets, because I'm still alive today, but others struggle to liberate their people and die even in the process of that struggle. So if it is only when you are selfish or you think about yourself that you think about how to build some more empire around yourself, and you will not think about the next generation. A leader must think about the next generation.
I wish all the political parties in this country thought about the generation more than their own elections. And you say Nigeria needs to progress. I'm not going to ask you any more questions. I would love to take some questions from the floor. So please raise your hand high and wait until the microphone comes your way. Could we go to the woman in the front bench?
Hi, so I'm Nigerian, and I have a lot of problems with generally how federal government is handled in Nigeria, but specifically, I just want to make a critique about your comment on the same-sex laws that were instituted while you were in office. It's not even a matter of same-sex marriage in Nigeria. We're not even at that point yet. Is that you criminalize it to such an extreme degree, 14 years in prison, when we're living in a country where so many people are still living in poverty. Girls are not educated, 200 girls are kidnapped, and it's not a big deal. Like, we don't have any proper functioning world-class tertiary educations. Don't you think it's problematic that what the government is focusing its time and resources on is criminalizing like gay people, when the main focus should be the fundamentals of human living? It's not about same-sex marriage. Nigerians haven't even got to the point where they're having a conversation about same-sex marriage. It's putting people in prison for, like, there's so much more we should be worrying about. We should be worrying about the insane level of corruption in our government. I can't wrap my head around that concept. So I'd like to know your comments on that.
Yes, thank you. Because, though I spoke on that extensively, but it's something very touchy and something that is dear to the minds of so many young people. And there are some times that you looked at things in a way that you may begin to lose the value. Nigeria as a nation, and indeed most of our other African countries, they have challenges, and governments are handling them. The issue of same-sex marriage is just one. The parliament passed so many laws. The same-sex marriage law is just one out of those laws. And I told you that, look, since that law was passed, because of the social media these days, you know what is happening all over the world. How many Nigerians have been criminalized? How many Nigerians? I used to ask, how many Nigerians have been criminalized? So you really see that Parliament, yes, trying to solve a social problem. But I promise, and I believe even the current president too, can give you the guarantee that Nigerians will not be criminalized or discriminated against. No Nigerian has been criminalized. If you know any, let me know. The other issues you raise, we are working, and government is a continuous process. And I've told you that some of these issues I raised, like maybe the WIN, the agripreneurs, and so on, you see that these are programs of government that will enable build youth. And if you create an environment where young people will be able to generate enough income to take care of themselves, your security problems will be resolved. And these are not problems that you solve overnight. I always tell people that running a country is like even building a house. If you want to build a 15-story building, even if you have all the money in the world, there's a shell period, there's a minimum number of days. So no president can move into a country and expect that under 4 months, 5 months, you move that country from a particular level to the level you expect. But you need a continuation to get to where we are going. And if you look at all the programs we started, they pointed to a clear direction that the country was moving. And all those people who raised the issue of same-sex marriage, I told them that they should watch out whether one young Nigerian, either a male or a female, will be criminalized. If you know any, you tell us. I'm not aware of any.
We'll take a couple more questions before we go to the bar. There's a gentleman on the second row. Yep.
How far do you think that the WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank, through their structural adjustment programs and insistence on free trade, are perpetuating a second scramble for Africa? And if they are, who are we to fear more, the West or the Chinese?
Well, that's a more of a theoretical question, purely for maybe academic environment. Because all nations are just like individuals. You, as a leader of a nation, you need resources to develop your nation. And sometimes there's always competing interests. And of course, you know that the world is, these days is talk about the concept of the global village. Both East or West, there's nowhere that African countries don't go to help development, or depending on your interests and depending on their interests. So it's not that you have to go to the left, or you have to go to the right. But what is the best interest of your people, and what do you want at that particular time? Because most Africans, unlike before when talk about non-aligned and aligned and so on, no, now it's no longer there. Now it's the economic interest. How do you create the enabling environment and provide the infrastructure for your people to develop? I don't have any recommendation that you should go to the west or go to the right or you stay at the center. It depends on your interests and the issues you'll be discussing.
So if I could try and clarify the question again, I think the question is more about should we fear the East or the West in terms of their involvement in trade in Nigeria? Is it something to be scared of? Is it neo-colonialism?
No. Of course, you must trade with the West, you must trade with the East. That's what I'm saying. We cannot say that Africans must trade among Africans alone, or Nigerians must trade among Nigerians alone. No. Because the different nations have different resources. What we have in Nigeria, probably one European country may not have. What they have, we don't have. So you must trade that, so you cannot limit yourself. It has nothing to do with colonialism. Those who make solid arguments about colonialism must also look at the history of nations and the way the whole world evolved. Today we are living in a century, in the 18th century it was quite different. In the 11th century it was quite different. So as we progress, things changes, and you must appreciate that. The relationship between UK and Nigeria before 1960 was different from the relationship between UK and Nigeria in the early 60s, in the early 70s, early 80s, up to date. So there's no one country, whether it is Nigeria or any other African country, that will say that, look, you'll be an island because you have some colonial experience. No. In both ways, colonial relationship is not all about negative things. Some people may see it negative, some people see it the positive aspect of it. But certain things that happen in Africa wouldn't have happened if we never had that kind of experience. So it's a two-way thing.
Thank you. Can we take another question, please? Someone waving very enthusiastically over there.
My question is on the $2 billion arms deal in Nigeria. The Buhari administration just uncovered corruption practices in the office of the former National Defense, which I'm sure you were the president then, the Sambo Dasuki deal. Was this a deal you knew about, or was it not? And if it was, what did you do?
Thank you. I think the young lady who raised the issue of same-sex marriage also alluded to the issues of corruption. If you look at, I'm not going to defend myself. I was the president, and if things happen, when you are the president of a country or the governor of a state, you own up both negative and positive things. If there are growth, it is to your own glory. If there are some negative things, it is your own detriment. You cannot run away from that. But one thing about the issues of corruption in Nigeria, I always say that, look, these matters are in courts, and let us allow some of these processes to end. Lately, some judges were also invaded. In Nigeria, we practice complete separation of powers. The judiciary was not under the control of the president, the legislators, and the executive. Lately, from what he said, you must be following up the Nigerian story. Some Supreme Court justices even, they break into their houses at 2 a.m. and they were arrested, accused of corruption. So there are so many things about the corruption, and I always say people should be patient to follow up these matters to the conclusion before you pass a verdict. Because if you read a paper written by one Reverend Father, Matthew Kuka, he analyzed what happened in this country. We gained independence in 1960. The first military coup was 1967. And why the military coup? They accused the politicians were all corrupt. The military took over. Another military coup that, of course, counter coup that led to the Civil War. After that, we set up what we call the Second Republic that was headed by Alhaji Shehu Shagari, 1979. They finished 4 years. 3 months into the second tenure, December 1983, the military struck. The accusation was that they were all corrupt. Some of them they used military tribunals to try them, and some of them were sentenced 300 years imprisonment, 200 years imprisonment. After that, a counter coup again among the military themselves. So you see that it becomes a major topic for the change of government. Whenever there is change of government, what you hear is corruption. I'm not saying there's no corruption in Nigeria. There was corruption. There's no way anybody could say there was no corruption. And most African countries and most countries also in the world, if you have read some books, they will analyze what people talk about corruption globally. There's almost no country that is free. The degree varies. The perception varies. And that is why probably the Transparency International talks about corruption perception index. How do you perceive the way corruption affects your people, affect your economy? It's mainly a question of perception. Depends on the issues being raised on the media every day. So yes, the National Security Advisor was accused, and what I read from the papers is that $2.something billion. And I don't believe somebody will just lift $2.something billion. We bought warships, we bought aircrafts, we bought a lot of weapons for the army, and so on and so forth. And you are still saying $2.something billion. So where did we get the money to buy all this? But I don't want to go into that because these matters are in court. And I don't want to be seen as a former president challenging what the sitting government is doing. So I try to keep quiet, and I also see that there will be time for us to look into those areas. I agree with you. There were issues of corruption in Nigeria from 1960 till date. Even as we are talking, if you read the papers, people are raising issues of corruption, even among key actors, even the current government. So I believe most of our problem is the issue of economic development. And until you get a society out from that poverty level, and people begin to be economic independent, people begin to create wealth, generate wealth and create wealth, this issue of putting hands into the till to help themselves may be there. We set up, we knew that there were issues of corruption in Nigeria, and we tried to strengthen the institutions. And I always believe, maybe that's why some people think that, oh, we did not fight corruption. But I said that, look, we had issues of armed robbery in Nigeria before. We never had armed robbery until after the Civil War. After the Civil War, small arms and light weapons moved into the hands of non-state actors. And some of them started using them for robbery. And of course, the military government came up with a capital punishment for armed robbery. If you are caught and you are convicted by a court for armed robbery, you are shot. But that didn't stop people from armed robbery. So I said that the best way to manage corruption is to make sure that people don't have access to money that belongs to all. So we have to strengthen the institutions. We have to change the way we do it. Do things. We have to manage our finances. We have to pay our salaries. And we are succeeding to make sure that nobody just wakes up and have his hands on the public till. So we are succeeding, and we are doing it very well. I don't want to go into that area because that is not the subject of discussion. But we worked hard to reduce it. Yes, there were corruption issues. Yes, there are still corruption issues. But some of them are a bit over, is blown, I will say exaggerated, and gives a very bad impression about the nation. You cannot say the National Security Advisor stole $2.2 billion. It's not just possible.
I'm afraid that is all we have time for in here. We will be going to the bar very briefly. In the meantime, please remain seated whilst we leave, but first join me thanking Dr. Jonathan for a really insightful talk.